The date is New Year's Day, 1976, and while most of the country was recovering from celebrations, one quiet house in Plymouth holds a chilling secret. At 9 p.m., two concerned church members arrive at the home of Esther Soper, a devoted, austere woman who never misses a meeting. Instead of greeting them, the door opens to a scene so bizarre and violent it still haunts investigators to this day. Esther Soper was found murdered, bludgeoned with a cider bottle, strangled with her own tights, and wrapped in a curtain. The killer vanished without a trace. More than 40 years later, the murder remains unsolved. Esther was a 51-year-old widow living alone in Mutley, Plymouth. Her devotion to one of the most conservative Christian sects, called the Exclusive Order of the Plymouth Brethren, was profound. She lived a very simple life, rarely socialized outside of her church, and was deeply isolated, even estranged from her own family. Have you ever felt so closed off from the world that your disappearance might not even be noticed? In Esther's world, that almost became a reality. When the church members checked on her absence from a meeting, they found her body in the hallway, wrapped in curtains and absolutely covered in blood. The cause of death, severe blows to the head with a cider bottle, followed by strangulation with her own tights. Her home was ransacked, but valuables were left behind. Something about the scene didn't add up. At the time of her death, Esther was trying to sell her house. She had multiple viewings scheduled. One potential buyer had given the name Clifford Sparks, but when police attempted to locate him, they found dozens of people with the name Clifford Sparks who had no connection to the case. Detectives speculated it could be a fake name, perhaps someone wanting access to the property. Imagine being alone in your home, hearing a stranger's voice through the door, someone who may have lied to get inside. What would you do? More than 80 detectives worked hard on the case, even interviewing over 33,000 people over a span of 7 months. But they hit a wall. In 1997, police sent clothes to the lab for DNA testing, hoping to find a trace of the killer. Only Esther's DNA was found. No foreign DNA surfaced. In 2006, a criminal cases review unit was established to revisit the case, but again, no breakthroughs. Theories around Esther's murder are as unsettling as the crime itself. Was it a flawed robbery? The state of the house suggests so, but none of her valuable possessions were taken. Was there a religious motive? There was no apparent conflict between her faith and her murder. Was there someone with an agenda? Some people speculate that the viewing appointment was a ruse, possibly to claim the property or for even darker reasons. A disturbing online discussion even floated the possibility of a sexually motivated murder involving fantasies or paraphernalia, involving strangulation using hosiery. Esther's murder remains the oldest unsolved case in southwest England. Despite the years, the investigation is still technically open. Police still review it periodically, hopeful that new information or forensic advances may just bring justice. Now, let this story sink in for a moment. A woman defined by her religion, isolated by choice, disappeared from her home, on a national holiday. Her murder was ugly, brutal, and strange. But what stands out most isn't just the violence, but the fact that it took place in her own home, with no one noticing until it was far too late. What do you think happened to Esther Soper? Was it a robbery gone wrong? A neighbor with dark motives? Or something that cuts deeper, tied to her faith, or even possibly her loneliness? Because echoes of that night still linger in Mutley Terrace. Rest in peace, Esther Soper. In 1922, on a remote Bavarian farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, an entire family and their maid was slaughtered with a pickaxe. Days before the murders, the family noticed several strange footprints in the snow leading towards their farmhouse, but none leading away. They heard footsteps in the attic, found a strange newspaper that no one in the house had bought, and even discovered a key to their home had mysteriously disappeared. But instead of fleeing, they stayed, and just days later, 6 people were dead. This is the terrifying story of the Hinterkaifeck murders. The farmstead was called Hinterkaifeck, located about 40 miles north of Munich, Germany. It was isolated, fields, forest, and a dirt path separating it from the rest of the world. The family who lived there were Andreas Gruber, who was 63 years old, his wife, Kazilia, 72 years old, their widowed daughter, Victoria, 35, and Victoria's 2 children, Kazilia, 7, and Joseph, just 2 years old. The household had a reputation in the village. Andreas was known as harsh, even cruel. Rumors swirled that Joseph, the baby, might not have been fathered by Victoria's late husband, but by Andreas himself. The family was whispered about, isolated before their deaths. And then, in late March 1922, things began to get strange. A few days before the murders, Andreas noticed footprints in the snow leading from the forest directly to the farmhouse, but there were no footprints leading back. At night, the family heard footsteps in the attic. When searched by Andreas, he found nothing. They discovered a newspaper from Munich lying in the house, even though no one had bought it, and the key to their front door suddenly went missing. Neighbors urged Andreas to leave the farm, but he didn't. Whether it was stubbornness, pride, or disbelief, the Gruber family stayed put, and that decision would cost them their lives. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, the killer struck. One by one, the family members were lured into the barn, probably by noises made by the intruder. First Andreas, then his wife Kazilia, and then their daughter Victoria, and finally little 7-year-old Kazilia. Each was struck with a mattock, a heavy pickaxe-like tool. The blows were merciless, crushing skulls, leaving them unrecognizable. Little Kazilia clung to life for long enough to pull out her own hair in terror before she died. Inside the farmhouse, the maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had only started working there that very day, was murdered in her bed. 2-year-old Joseph was killed in his crib. 6 people, entire generations of a family, all wiped out in one night. Days passed before anyone realized something was wrong. Neighbors noticed that the family hadn't been seen. The little girl was missing school. The mail was piling up. But smoke was still rising from the farmhouse chimney. The cattle had been fed, and someone had milked the cows. On the 4th of April, neighbors finally entered the property. What they found was absolutely horrifying. Bodies piled up in the barn under straw, Maria dead in her room, and Joseph lifeless in his cot. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was that the killer had stayed in the farmhouse for several days after the murders. They ate the family's food, they fed the animals, they lived there, surrounded by the corpses. Police swarmed the farm, but in 1922 forensic science was limited. At first they suspected robbery, but valuables and money were untouched. Then they looked into the family's dark secrets. Some believed that Andreas and Victoria's rumoured incestuous relationship had led to violence. Others thought Victoria's lover, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, was the killer. He was a neighbour, the father of one of Victoria's children, and he had a key to the farmhouse. Suspicion grew when he reportedly showed little emotion at the crime scene, and knew details about the bodies before anyone told him. But there was never enough evidence. Dozens of suspects were questioned, but the case went cold. Over the years, the Hinterkaifeck murders have spawned countless theories. Theory 1. The neighbour theory. This is the theory that Lorenz Schlittenbauer killed the family in a jealous rage. Theory 2. The robber theory. This theory states that it was travelling criminals who came to the farmstead for thievery, although the untouched money casts a lot of doubt. Theory 3. The family theory. This theory dictates that incest and violence within the household boiled over. Theory 4. The stranger theory. This theory states that the unknown figure who left footprints in the snow was a drifter who lived in the house before and after the murders. However, despite this case being revisited countless times, even as recently as 2007, no definitive answers have ever emerged. The farmhouse became a grim monument. Villagers were terrified of it, and in 1923 it was demolished. A shrine now stands on the site. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's greatest unsolved crimes. And perhaps the most chilling part is this. The killer didn't just murder 6 people. They lived in their house, ate their food, and cared for the animals, as if stepping into the lives of the family that they had just destroyed. Imagine those final days, the strange sounds in the attic, the missing key, the footprints in the snow. The Grubers knew that something was wrong, but they stayed. And somewhere out there, their killer, or killers, walked away into the forest, never caught and never named. A ghost story rooted in reality, still haunting the Bavarian countryside over 100 years later. Rest in peace, Andreas Gruber, Cecilia Gruber, Victoria Gabrielle, and the 2 small children, Cecilia and Joseph. And rest in peace to Maria Baumgartner.